Well, good evening, everyone. I'm not going to hang about because I've got 2 wars to get through. Right, it's early July in 1914, and the better part of Eastbourne are sunning themselves on the western lawns, known locally as the Snoot, and they probably just come from Summerdown Fields where the county agricultural show has just been held, and all is right with the world. And there's one of the many sort of hospitality visits by the Channel Squadron of the fleet, and just a few of the 40 battleships that they had at the time. As I say, all was well with the world, and then suddenly Archduke Ferdinand III got shot in Sarajevo, Austria declared war on Serbia, and the world went mad. Massive failure of diplomacy across Europe, and we found ourselves at war within 5 weeks. We certainly didn't see this one coming, not at that particular time anyway. Never mind, it'll all be over by Christmas, but they didn't say which Christmas. And the start of a major poster campaign encouraging people to volunteer for the forces. And everybody, up until 1916, did volunteer. And women of Britain say go, we're backing your men to go off to war. And here's a really nice picture taken in Seaside Road of the men. These are the volunteers marching up to the town hall to sign on. And a lot of them were signed on en masse, as it were. Whole groups of people from the workplace would go, very much encouraged by their employers. And here they are, early September, standing on Eastbourne Station, waiting to go off for their training. And so sad there's only one sad bit in this, it does get better, honestly. This is just really 4 weeks later, this is the first military funeral in Eastbourne. And you can see what a massive event this was just by the railway station. So the effects of war hit the town in all sorts of ways. Now, there's a chap called Lowther, who was a county dignitary, who owned Herstmonceux Castle at the time. And he was asked by the authorities that be to sort of form another regiment. And he called them the South Downs, or the South Downers, as they were called. And because his name was Lowther, people love alliteration, and they became known as Lowther's Lambs. And really very much encouraged by saying no man under canvas and happy training. I suppose anybody who's been in the forces knows how happy the training is. And beds for all the rest of it. So, a lot of encouragement there. And it is true to say that a lot of people, particularly from the east end of Eastbourne, were encouraged to join up so that they could have a new pair of boots, possibly for the first time. And again, as another huddle outside at the railway station as all the new recruits come together. This is sort of like a major thing going on in the town, of course. And here are Lowther's Lambs, just a year later, still doing their training near Bexhill. The future for them wasn't going to be very good, and this is just really the one sad bit. A year later, 30th of June, a day before the Battle of the Somme really got underway, Lowther's Lambs went into action, and they were sort of fundamentally wiped out. And some people called it the day that Sussex died. And we see this county flag, don't we, on the 16th of June every year, which is Sussex Day. It's also flown by a lot of people just 2 weeks later on the 30th to actually remember what happened to Lowther's Lambs. So that's the sad bit over, gets a bit happier now. The Defence of the Realm Act came in. Of course, when you go to war, massive changes happen in the way that the place is governed and controlled. Land and factories just routinely seized for war purposes. British summertime comes in. Pub drinking hours are cut, just 2 hours at lunchtime, 2.5 hours in the evening. Most women required to work. And this was sort of really quite a major social change, as we shall see. And no bonfires or kites, because that can send all sorts of secret signals to the enemy. This is sort of round about Easter 1915, and sort of on the home front, as it were, not very much is sort of happening at all. Extra trains were laid on to bring people for the Easter holiday weekend in Eastbourne, and life sort of for a lot of people continued as normal. The only trouble was when you were walking along the front and the wind was in a certain direction, you could hear a constant boom, boom going on from the carnage that was taking place 60 miles away. Quite incredible. Those lovely bathing machines, all lined up there, were there until 1916, and then the council removed them because it was thought to be wonderful cover for some invading force coming in from the sea. So they're all taken off as a precaution, never to return. Bands. Music, military music, very, very important. This is an advert from December 14, advertising the municipal orchestra playing at the Winter Garden. And you can see at the bottom, a new first-class military band plays every morning on the seafront. A lot of band playing going on because the government thought it would be very important to maintain morale. So local people backing the war effort, doing what they could. Firms encouraged their workforce to join up. In fact, some companies, including the Eastbourne Borough Council, actually gave an undertaking to anybody who volunteered to join the forces that they would make up their wages to the previous level. Quite something. Horses, very much needed, of course. Horses and vehicles donated. Key sites were being guarded by volunteers from the effect of saboteurs, and in particular they were very worried about the water reservoirs and saboteurs coming along and poisoning the local water. Fundraising was going on for arms, of course, sending treats to the troops through the Red Cross, etc. A lot of particularly women's groups organised themselves to do that. And little old Eastbourne, that had never seen a widget in its life, and certainly didn't know how to spell it, were actually making planes and munitions. Again, the importance of posters, because you've got to sort of really, the means of communication at this time weren't exactly brilliant, and poster campaigns were one of the major ways of getting a message over and actually bending and controlling the population to do all sorts of things, of course, that they wouldn't normally do. Obviously people being asked to contribute to the war effort. Street collections, fundraising going on. This is Caffin's Garage, the first proper Caffin's Garage, built in 1906 at the junction of Seaside Road and Seaside, and this was given over to the assembly and manufacture of planes during the war. And something like 75 aircraft were actually constructed in this garage. And here's a little picture of some of the staff, and notice the number of women now in the workforce. Also making military vehicles as well. Military presence in the town sort of occurred very quickly because of clearly Eastbourne's location just across the way from over there, and very, very near to Newhaven Harbour. And Newhaven was very, very important militarily during the war. You see lots of troops camped out, normally under canvas, and normally just for a few weeks at a time, at Spot Farm, which is really the Willingdon Park Drive, Willingdon Trees area of Hampden Park, Whitbread Hollow, just across the downs from Holywell, and Horsey Bank, which is the St Philip's Avenue area. We'll talk a little bit more about Red Cross Eastbourne, but suddenly the appearance of many treatment and recovery centres for injured troops, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. And other things that happened, the Eastbourne airfield, which is already in existence from 1912, expanded greatly, and the stuff going on at Willingdon as well. Billeting the troops was quite interesting, because again, this is wartime. A sergeant or a corporal would come to the bottom of the street with his platoon, and accompanied by a bobby. They would go along, knocking on every door, asking a few questions about who lived there, and depending on the answers, you were simply allocated on a billet 2 or 3 or 4 troops, and that was it. And if you refused, you were fined really quite heavily. No messing about. This is one of the first of the camps in Whitbread Hollow. This was the Royal Army Medical Corps. There's another picture of it. You can just sort of see the pier poking out in the background, so it gives you an idea of where you are. And then at the other end of the town, really on the crumbles, next to where Prince's Park was going to be, was this. This was the works of the Eastbourne Aviation Company that had been set up just a couple of years before the war started to manufacture water planes, float planes, seaplanes. And this was really taken over by the Navy, no RAF of course at that time, for the manufacture of planes, and many hundreds of planes were actually created here during the 4 years of the war. And that's the sort of thing that was being built. And it gives you an idea of how deserted and how empty the crumbles were at that time. And again, a picture of the workforce. Again, notice all the women that there were in the workforce. Women in particular used for stretching the canvas over the wooden wings. And this is a site where all the motor distributors are today. All the car showrooms opposite the big Tesco on Lockbridge Drove. And again, this started out as an airfield around about 1912, giving flying lessons, all the rest of it. Again, taken over by the Navy as perhaps the principal naval flying school in the country at the time, training not only British pilots, but pilots from various parts of the Commonwealth. And hundreds did their training here. There was also 750 military posted here, again manufacturing aircraft, and something like 700 aircraft were actually created here during the war. And the airfield expanded greatly to occupy about 250 acres in total. And they also used to use the playing fields of Handon Park for takeoff and landing practice. There we are. The airship station was created. I think the first shed was there about 100 yards long in 1915, and the second one followed a year later. And this was really, I suppose, a barrage balloon with a cut-out bit of aircraft fuselage underneath it, a 2-seater, with a bit of a propeller attached. And this thing would take a couple of chaps, even in the depths of winter, patrolling the channel. And you can imagine there's no heaters or anything. It's absolutely dire. And they could do about 30 knots, but were expected to be aloft for hours on end patrolling. And this is what they were looking for, U-boats. U-boats were stationed in a pack, really between the Royal Sovereign Lighthouse, you know, the thing that's just been demolished, and Beachy Head, and looking for anything coming in or out of New Haven Harbour. During the war, they managed to sink 57 merchant ships, so really sort of a major threat that needed to get sorted out. And it was interesting that for the first few years of the war, it was done in sort of quite a gentlemanly way. A merchant ship would be stopped by a U-boat, and they'd be given a number of minutes to take to the lifeboats and get off before the merchant ship was sunk. You get to 1917 and no notice was given at all. The world changed a bit. Public information, no wireless. Wireless hasn't, BBC hasn't been invented yet. So telegraph information points, very important. 5 of them in Eastbourne and 1 in Hampden Park, where people could go on a daily basis and try and find out snippets of information about what was going on. We've already talked about the poster campaigns. Civilian evacuation drills were going on because the authorities certainly thought there could be an invasion at any minute, and people were told to listen out for church bells, which was the alarm signal, and to go to a pre-arranged assembly point, and to take with them clothing, all the food they could carry, and a cooking pot. And that was it. And if there were to be air raids, the warnings would be given primarily by the police using the latest technology, which is that. Take cover. So let's talk about Eastbourne as a Red Cross town. Well located, I mean, a town that had had a reputation for convalescence for a long time. All bright and breezy and everything, and near particularly to Newhaven Port. Injured people would come in on a stretcher, mainly in the guards van of a normal train. A little bit later on, certainly by the end of 2015, ambulance trains, specialist trains were being used of up to 16 coaches with an operating theatre, with its own kitchen, with its own pharmacy, bringing in the wounded. And that started to happen about once a month. And later on, they started to come in about once a week. So it was really quite significant stuff. And a lot of the larger houses, particularly in the Meads area, were taken over, or in fact donated by the residents for use as Red Cross hospitals. And this is where the more serious injuries were treated before they were moved on. And the allowance was 4 shillings per day per man to provide the care. Other places were used. This is the old workhouse that was in Old Town, really in the vicinity of the Tally-Ho pub. And this was taken over in 1915 to become a military hospital. Later, of course, in 1930, I think it was, to become St Mary's Hospital, now no longer. And this is St Celine, a modern photo really. This was St Celine School in Upperton Road, again taken over as a military hospital in 1915, and later on became the maternity home for Eastbourne from 1920 onwards. And Theresa May was born there. So the Blue Boys. The Blue Boys had distinctive blue uniforms with white lapels. And these were the chaps who were in various stages of convalescence, so not in their full proper military uniform. And it was quite fortunate that they had that very distinctive uniform, because men of a certain age simply walking around the town were clearly not volunteers and really frowned upon, and this thing about being handed a white feather was really quite real. So they managed to escape that, and in fact those people who were in proper jobs and shouldn't be volunteers, it might be, I don't know, a doctor or a dentist or something, they managed to avoid being handed white feathers by wearing badges like this, which actually says that they're on war service. This is Summerdown Fields, where that lovely agricultural show had taken place in the summer of 1914, now being converted with up to 100 huts. And this was the major convalescent centre for the Blue Boys. So these were people who'd sort of gone through hospital, but nowhere near fit to fight yet, sometimes with physical problems, sometimes, of course, with shell shock and that sort of thing. And this camp would accommodate up to 3,000 men at a time. and during the course of the war, in fact a bit beyond that, accommodated something like 150,000 men passed through its doors. It actually closed in 1922. And all sorts of jolly things going on, all sorts of fetes and everything else. In fact, the town really took the Blue Boys to their heart, and they formed their own band and had their own concert parties on the pier, in the Pier Theatre. And here they are sort of marching as a group down Seaside Road. So supporting the Blue Boys locally, they got free bus rides and free deck chairs, free entrance to the pier, discounts in shops and donated food, etc. And free treatment at Princess Alice Hospital, which is where the Hawthorns now is in Carew Road, and the Louth Hospital in St Anne's Road. And this is these ladies here, this team, these were really sort of very early occupational therapists who worked miracles getting these guys back on their feet, literally. And it's said that the work that was done here by these occupational therapists was so advanced, so progressive for its time, that it actually laid the foundations for modern occupational therapy. And the lady who controlled it all, lady in the centre called Mrs. Paget, was a very rich American heiress who funded the whole lot personally. And they actually called her the Angel of Summerdown. Unfortunately, she died in 1917 before the full fruits of her activity could actually be seen. Right, going on now, talking a little bit more about the role of women, these poster campaigns, incredibly important. A few stock photos, I'm afraid, working in munitions, in construction, in agriculture, and as auxiliaries in the police, and auxiliaries in the fire service as well. So major social changes about the role of women in society. And I love this one. Look, be patriotic, hire a car with a lady driver. I mean, this lady, I think, was really quite brilliant. In fact, she got national acclaim because this is the front cover of a national magazine. Promoting what she's doing in Eastbourne. Again, more posters. This is interesting. Wait a minute. This is the Eastbourne bus depot, which during the First World War was given over to the manufacture of munitions, and this team of ladies were actually called munitionettes. And they had the job of making mortars and grenades and all the rest of it, doing an absolutely key job. And this is just about my favourite photograph, this. They formed their own football team. I mean, we talk today, don't we, about how women are progressing in the world of soccer. But these girls were doing this in 1916. I think it's just tremendous, with their hats on and everything else. And on that board it says ECMOD Girls Team. ECMOD means Eastbourne Corporation Motor Omnibus Department. So a little bit about food. This was the first sort of ration to come in, sugar. This is a sugar registration card. This came in October 1917. Other things, meat and butter, etc., and tea came started being rationed in the early days of 1918. Food rations and very closely controlled by the government. Certainly we get to sort of like March, April time in 1918, and there was real hunger around. And in fact in Eastbourne, the first British restaurant opened to sort of start feeding, giving people at least one square meal a day. That opened in Seaside, and there were plans. In fact, there were 3 or 4 more did open during the summer of that year, but then, of course, by the end of the war, in November, sort of closed shortly afterwards. But they did get into the realm of really struggling to feed people. Campaigns to eat less bread. In fact, by the end of the war, 4 or 5% of the content of bread was actually mashed potato to make the cereal go further. And margarine had been invented round about 1890, but very much looked down upon. But here we've got the Maypole Dairy Company actually promoting it because there's no butter to be had. Grow your own food, very important, of course. And a major drive in Eastbourne to make more allotments available. The council did their bit by releasing any bit of land that they could. The Duke of Devonshire's estate, the Chatsworth estate, really did brilliantly. At the beginning of the war, they were running 200 allotments, and by the end of the war, 700 allotments were available, and they were all available free of charge, no rent at all, to encourage people to grow their own. And this is Rationing. This is the assembly hall of the town hall, where hundreds of primarily women were involved in organising the rationing, the ration book system for the town. And in fact, their work was so important that certainly girls in the sixth form of local schools were actually taken away from their studies occasionally to come and help as a volunteer here. And petrol, of course, became very, very scarce. By the time we get to 1917, the price had doubled to £1 a gallon. Can you imagine? £1 a gallon. And this chap, Chapman, who ran a fleet of charabancs, got into trouble because he was caught undertaking a leisure trip with petrol in his tank when he shouldn't have done it, and he was fined. But he was very resourceful. He started converting his charabancs and filling the gas bag on the top with town gas. And that was actually running his charabancs, and he did 2 excursions a week up to London and back with these gas bags. And he's quite an entrepreneur, this chap. He's worth a talk in his own right. But here he is sort of promoting the facility. So we're getting towards the end of the war, and coal becoming very, very scarce, can't be imported through New Haven. That's required for military purposes, and a lot of it came in from really the Thames estuary, came in by rail, and it was people really had to go themselves to pick it up from the coal depots by the station, because by this time there were no oats left to feed the horses. And horses couldn't be given draft duties if they hadn't been fed oats. So this sort of horse and cart arrangement sort of went out the window, and people had to go in their own hand carts to the back of the station to collect their own coal. So, you know, things really sort of getting quite dire. But eventually, it's all over, and one can breathe a sigh of relief. And here we are, 1920, the War Memorial that we all know being consecrated, the £1,000 required for the War Memorial being raised by a public subscription. And the statue on the top, the Angel of Victory, facing due south, quite unusually, because by convention, Angels of Victory are supposed to face due east towards the rising sun. But it doesn't in Eastbourne. I wish I knew why. But that was the end of the Great War, the war to end all wars, and it won't happen again, will it? We've learned our lessons, haven't we? Fewer than 20 years later. We saw this one coming. A lot of work done in 1937 and 38 to build up the women's voluntary service, not royal at this stage, the local defence volunteers, auxiliary fire and police, air raid wardens, very, very important, and not royal at this stage, but the Observer Corps. And a lot of gas attack drills going on with, first of all, smoke was being used, but later on they actually used tear gas to make it more realistic, because they really did think that gas attacks were going to be the thing. And half a dozen big sirens installed and tested across the town. adverts, of course, for air raid wardens, and all of this organised by the council, who I have to say did an absolutely fantastic job, because all the preparation and organisation that went in beforehand, I think, did help Eastbourne cope with what was to follow. And certainly by the time the war started, over 400 people locally had actually volunteered to be air raid wardens. And fire wardens were very important, and we'll find out about this a little bit later on. And here's just an extract that's been provided. A lot of these little bits of paper, I have to say, have been provided by Kevin Gordon, who many of you will know. He's been absolutely brilliant in lending me a few things. And this is just happens to be Sidley Road, and this is the fire watchers. Well, turn and turn about, I suppose, of who does what and when. And this was done for every single street in the town. So there's a comprehensive fire watching system that pervaded throughout the war. And as we'll see, that was very important. All sorts of little pamphlets and everything produced for everybody. And here we are, look at this. Air raid precautions. This is Mr. Bosley of Sidley Road has been appointed as a warden by Mr. W.H. Smith, Eastbourne Chief Constable. You can't forget that name, can you? And everybody, of course, is issued with gas masks, and eventually war is declared, and a military presence in the town is suddenly very apparent. This is the Liverpool Scottish Regiment arriving in the town, and some years later, or a couple of years later, this is the Canucks, the Canadians coming here. And they came here actually in their hundreds and hundreds with their light tanks and their scout cars, ploughing up the pavements of Meads, but we won't go into that. It's a small price to pay. And all of these guys were volunteers. They were all volunteers, which I think is just tremendous, coming over here to sort of help defend the mother country. And incredibly popular, of course, because they were like very different. They had a lot of money. They had all sorts of lovely food that people had long forgotten about. And they really sort of kept the winter garden going, because it was one of the few places that stayed open during the war, with Gordon Ryder and his band, and there were sort of dances several times a week. These were very popular with local girls, and in fact about 150 Eastbourne women married Canadians, many of them of course moving to Canada after the war. They used the Downs for all their manoeuvres and training, and made short work of the lighthouse, which is now totally repaired, of course, but in quite a state at the time. Of course, everybody being encouraged to join the forces, and of course the Home Defence, which later on was called the Home Guard. And something like 1,500 men in Eastbourne actually joined the Home Guard. And Dad's army doesn't do, well, it's jolly funny, but it doesn't do too much of a favour for the Home Guard, because these guys, you know, of a certain age, most of them, were expected to train 2 nights a week and all day on a Sunday, and hold down their ordinary full-time job as well. So it was a lot to ask of people. And fundraising, of course, going on. And Eastbourne managed to raise in 2 weeks flat the entire cost of a Spitfire, which is not bad going. And of course, ration books coming up again. The adult weekly ration, first of all, meat was rationed by price, but later on by weight. And you can sort of, well, you know how much 1 ounce of cheese is. It's about a large OXO cube, isn't it? So, I mean, it's things were really sort of pretty tight at all. And again, all the rationing done from the town hall. This is Alderman Arthur Rush, the mayor of Eastbourne at the time, talking to the volunteers who are running everything. And again, a lot of control over the way that the communications are used. I think this is so rich. No extra trains at Christmas. We don't get any trains at Christmas. Women at war. Now, all women from 18 to 60 were were registered for war work, and you had the choice. If you're between 20 and 30 and mobile, that means you're not caring for children or elderly relatives, then you have the choice of either joining the services or be directed anywhere for war work. And I don't remember because I wasn't around, but my mother at the age of 21 was actually told to go to Gloucestershire and worked in a munitions factory for most of the war. She had no choice, you just did it, and that was it. And by 44, some 7 million women were involved in war work, and of course helping to control all the shortages. This is good, isn't it? I love this. Come into the factories, help win the war on the kitchen front. All this stuff, carrots help you see in the dark. I mean, an absolute joke, but it doesn't matter. It sort of worked at the time. Digging for victory, very important. And I love this picture. This is seaside recreation ground, actually being used for sheep grazing. I think it's just tremendous. I love that. And the Roseland area in particular, still a lot of market gardening going on there at the time before development took place. And these are a few land girls sort of helping out. Turn the gas down. And all the instructions to motorists, you have sort of restricted headlights and you can't have your inside light on and you've got to dampen down the indicators, all sorts of things going on. Stamp out black markets. Now, evacuation. Women wanted for the evacuation service. She's in the ranks too. Caring for evacuees is a national service. Now, evacuation was very, very important in the Eastbourne story. Leave this to us, Sonny. You ought to be out of London. Right. This is Eastbourne MP Charles Taylor, who was MP here for a very, very long time. I think it's at about 1970. 1935, Mr. Hitler is a great man because he and his wife were taken to Berlin to have dinner with Hitler as part of the charm offensive on the sort of, the powers that be in the British establishment. 1938, I don't believe there's going to be a war. You can enjoy your holiday in peace for many years to come. 1939, whoever the attacker might be, they would not go to the trouble of carrying bombs to attack Eastbourne. And we might scoff at that, but he was dead right. He was correct. Because Eastbourne was a designated safe area where a lot of people were going to be evacuated to, particularly from East London. And within days of war being declared, special trains were bringing hundreds and a few days later, thousands of people, particularly from the East End of London, to Eastbourne. And arriving sort of very bemused, they assembled to catch special buses just outside the Gilded Hotel, which is like the entrance to the shopping centre now, and taken to the Central Methodist Hall, which was the major distribution point. It wasn't only fit people, it was hospital patients as well, who were relocated. And this is the Princess Alice Hospital, which within a couple of months actually added 144 beds to the hospital to cater for the people coming down from London. And the whole business of accommodating evacuees at times was messy, I just have to say, because a lot of people resented having their lives turned upside down by people coming into their homes that they didn't know. And I have to say, in the more genteel parts of the town, people were having trouble with the language of some of these people, and they were hearing words they'd never heard before, and particularly the standards of personal hygiene and that sort of thing. And there were some issues, but there was a little sort of tribunal that was set up to sort of try and resolve complaints. And eventually things did get sorted out. And I remember one story, there was a lady in Meads who went to the tribunal and complained that if these urchins were not removed, her servants would resign. So there we are. So here we are. This is sort of like, you know, early 1940, and it's really called the Phoney War. You're in Terminus Road, and things are sort of, you know, going on as they should do. Easter comes up, and an estimated 30,000 people come to Eastbourne to spend their Easter holidays. Not really much going on at all. And then Dunkirk happened, and then the Battle of Britain was going on, and then suddenly in July 1940 the first bomb dropped in the Whitley Road area, and the world changed very quickly. And they suddenly realised this wasn't such a safe zone after all. And here's a nice picture at the station where a number of what turned out to be thousands of children were being evacuated out of Eastbourne, primarily to the areas to the north of London, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, etc. And here's good old Alderman Rush, the mayor again, saying goodbye to everybody. Whole classrooms whole classes were actually sent as a group under the control of their teacher. The teacher had to go with them, and while they were away was responsible for all aspects of their welfare. So an incredible responsibility, really. And it wasn't just senior children. These are, you know, kids, I suppose, of what, sort of 7 or 8 or 9 years old, having to go as well. A major wrench moving away from their families, of course. So population on the move in Eastbourne. The regular population of Eastbourne was about 53,000. In the autumn of 39, 20,000 people were added to the population here. And then once it became an unsafe zone in autumn 1940, look at that, 60,000 people were moved out. Massive, massive changes in population. You can imagine the organisation and in fact the disruption that went with all that. And certainly by the time we get to mid-September 1940, there were loudspeaker vans going around the town telling people not in essential occupations, they have 24 hours to leave town. Go to the town hall now with a suitcase, collect your rail warrant, and you're out of here. It's absolutely staggering what was going on. And the person who organised a lot of this, really quite superbly, was Alice Hudson. She'd been elected as a woman councillor, one of the first ones, in 1919, was mayor in 1926, and also during the war as well for a time. And she was in charge of the Evacuation Committee, a brilliant organiser. And it was her who did probably more than anybody help to help the town to keep its head above water with this massive change of population going on. So with a lot of the population gone and Eastbourne down to about 13,000 people, people here just have to keep calm and carry on. If you're a driver, you have hooded headlights, you watch out for the white rings painted on trees so you can see the side of the road. All road signs removed or painted over, and that includes vehicles. You mustn't let an invading force know where they are. So if you've got a van that says Blogs of Eastbourne, you paint out the Eastbourne. You can have Blogs of, but you can't have Eastbourne. If you park a car, you have to take the rotor arm out so it can't be used. Wooden posts across the golf course to stop gliders from landing. And there was a real issue about the main marsh road between Pevensey and Bexhill. They thought that would be a wonderful landing strip for enemy aircraft. Again, evacuation, have a case packed and listen out for the church bells. And this was all because Eastbourne was part of a South Coast forward defence zone. And this defence zone, because they were so worried about the threat of invasion, particularly towards the end of 1940 and going into 41, they didn't want too many civilians getting in the way. being held hostage or held to ransom or whatever else. And the defence zone behind Eastbourne was at times 20 miles deep, so you couldn't get within 20 miles of Eastbourne without a special pass. And in fact, at one time, people who lived in Hampden Park needed a pass to get through the gates at Eastbourne Station when coming in by train. Again, I won't go into detail of this, but these are fascinating to read. Little A5 sort of 4-page pamphlets that tells you what to do if there's an invasion, etc. And they didn't mess about. It's quite harsh, scary reading as to what people were told to expect. And of course, with the increasing number of air raids going on, a lot of advertising for free air raid shelters, and people could go and see the sort of thing that they could put in their back gardens. And public air raid shelters across the town, some purpose-built, others just using what's there, like the cellars of department stores and that sort of thing. And this was a cutout in the local paper that was published regularly that you were expected to take out in your pocket. And depending on where you were, you knew where the nearest shelter was. And they were open every day until 6 at night, closed at 6 because you weren't supposed to be out in the evening. And here's one still there, now used as a substation. This is at the bottom of Devonshire Place, thank you. A lot of advice about how to stay safe in your house is a good one, a good way of having a good night's rest. And really this sort of fear of invasion was really quite something. If the invader comes, stay put unless ordered to evacuate, ignore rumours, don't talk to the Germans. All of whom had superb English, of course, or give them food, drink or petrol, and disable cars and hide bicycles. We don't want them cycling to London. And this was the state of the seafront, 1940, 41, all sorts of barbed wire and tank traps and all the rest of it. And people, this is a no-go area, people simply not allowed to be here. And a couple of streets deep from the seafront was very important to keep clear. If you've got people invading, you don't want to come across, you don't want civilians getting in the way. And so all of the businesses were closed down, all of the people moved out, and these were just ghost streets. So this is the top part of Terminus Road, and this is a Seaside Road. Everything's sort of closed up and abandoned. Really quite, stringent stuff. This was Eastbourne Pier, of course, and you might just sort of see to the right-hand side of the Beaufort's gun a couple of chaps working in the distance, and they're taking up the floor of part of the pier. The pier was going to be blown up because this would be very useful to an invading force, and so last-minute compromise where they said, well, if you don't blow it up, we'll take out a gap in the middle so it can't be used, and that's what happened. You can see there on the left-hand side a gap in the pier. Bombs. I'm not going to talk too much about bombs, but I just want to stress for those who are not too familiar with Eastbourne just how awful it was. Eastbourne is said to have been the most attacked town in the southeast outside of London. It really was quite something. And although you probably can't see it too well, but all those little dots on the map show where bombs landed. This is a close-up with Eastbourne Station, top left, and the pier and bandstand at bottom right, with Terminus Road running between them. And you can just sort of see all the damage that was done in the central area of Eastbourne. And here are just a few figures. Look at these incendiary bombs, 4,000. Those fire wardens were absolutely invaluable in dealing with 4,000 incendiary bombs being dropped. And you can see all the rest of the figures. And the number of air raid warnings, 1,350. And you think, well, yes, But when you think that some of the warnings would last for several hours, think about how disruptive that would be on normal life if you can't go out, you can't go to the shops, you can't, have your lessons in school or whatever else. That was really quite something. And the cuckoo warnings I'll just talk about in a moment. So why was Eastbourne attacked in the first place? A lot of people say, and I can understand why, well, they were just dropping some spare bombs on their way back from the East End. No, this was deliberate. This was deliberate disruption, and disruption is the key word, prior to a German invasion, because little old Eastbourne, with its lovely sort of beaches of Norman's Bay and all the rest of it, absolutely perfect for a landing. And there are other landing sites identified to the west of Eastbourne as well. And they really wanted to disrupt as much as possible what was going on here. They could see the radar installations at Beachy Head and on the marshes. They sort of knew what the radar was, but didn't know actually how bad it was. It wasn't particularly successful at the time. There was a Luftwaffe training school just behind Dieppe. Now, if you're a rookie pilot and you're not too brilliant at navigation, you go up 10,000 feet and lo and behold, just across the water, there's the gleaming cliffs of Beachy Head. Not too difficult, is it? So very much used for training missions. Eastbourne was sort of poorly defended, sort of half a cluster of Bofors guns, and that's about it. And later on in the war, if Eastbourne beaches, etc., are very good for receiving an invasion, they're quite good as well for actually launching an invasion and being near to the port of Newhaven and having a railhead as well to get everything down. Their reconnaissance pictures would show all these lovely Canadian tanks on the streets of Meads. So, they really thought that things were going to happen. And here's just a picture of just a diagram. Eastbourne is in the middle of that, just above where it says 9th Army. And you can see how important strategically it was to disrupt Eastbourne. And these are some of the radar things. Now, the Royal Observer Corps, the Forgotten Army, these are all volunteers. They had to fund their own uniforms up until 1943 out of their own ration book allowance. And they did an absolutely superb job giving some warning of enemy aircraft coming in, either the sort of like the lone raiders who often affected Eastbourne, or looking at very large groups going on to London. And this was quite important. This was a listening wall that was used. Very, very clever, very simple idea. You just stand in the middle of that concave area and it concentrates the sound. So at night or on a misty day, and these chaps are very, very clever, they could tell by the engine notes, the sounds that they were hearing, what sort of aircraft they were and how many of them there were as well. So clever stuff. I love this. This is a Royal Observer on the Crumbles. You imagine an excited voice crackling over the radio. I've got them, 6, 10, 13, no, 14 blighters approaching. Southeast at 0, 50 feet, rooftop height. Miles 3, now 1, 14 Fokker Wolfs overhead with bombs attached. No, hold it, correction. 13 Fokker Wolfs overhead with bombs attached. 1 bomb approaching overhead with no Fokker Wolf attached. It always makes you laugh. Lovely. He survived, apparently. And we'll just talk a little bit about air raid warnings. A lot of it controlled just locally where we could. Again, this is Mr. W.H. Smith, the Chief Constable, underneath the Town Hall. And wider afoot, there were sort of regional control centres, which were very, very slow in reacting, really, because they had to look after the whole region. And if somebody saw 2 or 3 aircraft approaching Eastbourne intent on doing mischief, it was almost impossible to get the alarm sounded in time. And certainly by a year, really, between 42 and 43, what were called locally tip and run raids were quite something. Just a few aircraft at a time, only over the town for a few minutes, popping up over the downs with their engines feathered down, or coming in 50 feet across the crumbles below the radar. And really, Eastbourne was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was really, these raids were very, very disturbing. And I remember hearing at first hand from a lady no longer with us. As a young girl, she was walking down Green Street in Old Town on her way to work, and all of a sudden this German fighter popped up over the rooftops and started shooting at her. And she leapt over a garden wall and the thing passed. She got to work covered in mud and dead leaves, and they said, "What's happened to you?" And she said, "I've just been shot at by a German fighter." And they said, "But that's no excuse for being late." And they docked her half a day's pay. True story, apparently. So the Eastbourne cuckoo was born, and this was the Eastbourne's own early warning system. And they had to struggle to get this. The town council organised a meeting in the town hall with a chap called Lord Shawcross, who was in charge of South East region stuff for all this at the time. And Lord Shawcross was saying, "No, you can't have your own system. You've just got to play it by the book, and it's against all policy and all the rest of it." By total chance, at that time, 3 ME-109s came in across the crumbles at 50 feet, shot up the town for a few minutes and cleared off. And Lord Shawcross appeared from underneath the table and said, "Where do I sign?" So Eastbourne got its cuckoo, which was sort of like a warbling sound, and that gave up to 30 seconds warning of a raid coming in. That's all, just 30 seconds. Bombs. One bomb site looks like another. I'm only going to show 6 photos and that's it. Terminus Road. You're standing outside the McDonald's looking up at the station. This was Marks and Spencer's. Top of Terminus Road looking towards the sea. Charleston Road, Old Town. Hellfire Corner, Bourne Street area. Hundreds of houses demolished in the same area. Eastbourne Railway Station, and that's the 6th. That's the ration. I just want to show the lovely buildings before they were clobbered. Absolutely beautiful Barclays Bank in Terminus Road. The lovely Institute at the bottom of Grove Road. The east side of where we are now, the Cavendish Hotel. And this was one that didn't get hit at all. Well, it didn't have a scratch. And this was such a prominent building, the Grand Hotel on the seafront. And you do wonder why it wasn't attacked at all. Allegedly, it said that the German High Command gave instructions not to damage it in any way because it would make a nice summer home following a successful invasion. So the toll of all this, and really coming towards the end now, this is 200 people killed, and 1 person killed is always too many. But given the scale and the intensity of all the attacks on Eastbourne over many, many years, I think it's sort of like to the credit of somebody that only, as I say, only 200 people were killed. And nearly 500 houses destroyed, and a further 1,000 houses badly damaged. And really, the secret of the low tally is the importance of volunteers, the air raid wardens, the fire wardens, the special constables, etc. And I'll talk about British restaurants as well. The good old air wardens, and the WVS, after the war to become the WRVS. That lovely mare that we saw, Alice Hudson, actually ran the WVS as well. And they not only did the tea and sympathy bit, but they, as you can see, they got all the pig bins sorted out to help with the food chain, and ran sort of toy libraries and furniture stores, etc., for people who were displaced. So it did a lot of good. And this is sort of somebody in Enies Road that's just being bombed out and will want help, really from the council, who would be capable of organising for a rest centre, temporary housing, repairing her property if it could, and giving her clothes and furniture if she actually wanted it. So again, the council playing a pivotal role in all this. And this is the British restaurant in the Second World War, and there were 6 of these in Eastbourne, and they were set up really for to help with displaced people and making sure that they got at least 1 square meal a day. And I called it sort of like school dinners for grown-ups, really, because for a shilling, they could have a lovely 2-course meal and a cup of tea. And as I say, there were 6 in the town altogether. And the last one was around until 1954, which was the Victory restaurant at the bottom of Grove Road. And finally, a little bit about department stores. Plumber Roddice, which was one of the premier stores in the town, really where C&H fabrics were until recently. Look at the bottom there, we have a trained roof spotter, and we keep open during alerts. Everybody was told to go to the basement. This is Bobby & Co, the forerunner of Debenhams, probably the premier department store in the town, and a list of all the attacks that they've had, but they stay open and trade nevertheless. And this is Dale and Curley, which was originally on the corner where TJ Hughes were until recently, still going strong, even though their store had been totally destroyed by fire. They relocated. So planning for the peace in 1943, interesting, they knew the war was going to come to a successful end. And look at this, for the first time they thought about having, this is sort of like dream stuff, having a cafe at the Wish Tower, a new bathing pool at the Redoubt. They wanted to redevelop the Winter Garden, and you can see some of the things there, and an aerodrome for Eastbourne. That was interesting. And the day comes when we've got VE Day, and everybody can relax for a very short while. A street party in Old Town and in Hampden Park, that sort of thing. But then we can rejoice for a certain amount of time, but there's work to do. And this is the recovery challenge for Eastbourne. This is Eastbourne that prided itself on being a cut above the rest and the place to go to. Covered in bomb sites, 56 major bomb sites in Eastbourne at the end of the war. Housing crisis, it was always bad in Eastbourne, even worse now that you've lost all those houses to bombing. Parks and gardens ploughed up, the lovely carpet gardens just by the pier, used for growing onions during the Second World War, and the lovely downs covered in live ordnance and very much a no-go area. So a lot to do. So the question is, how did Eastbourne recover from this absolute bashing that it had over a number of years? How did it prosper at a time when money and materials were in short supply just after the war, and when there was major change in the way that the sort of services that tourists wanted? So how do they sort of keep up with the modern world? And I'd love to see you back here in October for the answer.